Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
My name is Dr. Ronda Chervin, and I am so happy to be doing an interview with Dr. Cynthia Toolin-Wilson, who, with the help of a co-author, has just finished an amazing book called The Story of Holy Apostles College and Seminary. Her co-author is Robert E. Hubbard. And this is a book about Holy Apostles College and Seminary, and I especially love the book because I taught at Holy Apostles College and Seminary for many years and know what a wonderful, outstanding place it is. And so would you tell us, Dr. Toolin, why you wrote this book?
Okay, well, let me give you a little background. On February 22nd, 1988, I converted to Catholicism, and the priest that I converted with, Father Smolensky, had taught a couple of courses at Holy Apostles. So he suggested I take some classes there. So I enrolled that summer, and I stayed until 1995 when I graduated with a 90-credit MA in theology. So what happened to me is that I fell in love with the place, and I fell in love with dogmatic and moral theology. I already had a PhD in sociology when I converted, but at Holy Apostles I studied Catholic social teaching under a really wonderful priest, Father Rudolph. And in all the years I studied sociology at UMass, I never once heard the words Catholic social teaching. So when I studied that subject matter, it changed my approach to social issues. It still has, and it's now even a course that I teach. So while I was working at Holy Apostles, I met Professor Bob Hubbard, the co-author of this book, at another local college. And we discovered that we were both Catholic and that we were both very concerned about life issues, especially abortion and euthanasia. Bob writes local histories, and he was very interested in working on a book concerning Holy Apostles, and so the rest is history. We combined our talents.
Now, this is not, you might be thinking, oh, this is a big, fat, boring book. Not at all. This is a book with the most gorgeous graphics that you could imagine, with wonderful pictures of the whole layout of the university, of the college and seminary grounds, and wonderful pictures of the people who played a role in starting it. Tell us a little bit about how this seminary began, because it's a very unusual seminary.
It is an unusual seminary. It started in the 1950s, the early 1950s, by a Franciscan priest from Quebec, Father Menard. He founded Holy Apostles as a minor seminary, and that was actually, I think, in 1957. And his goal was to have a seminary that would help older men discern whether or not they were called to the priesthood. So remember, this is the 1950s, and there was no shortage of priests. So it was an unusual seminary from the beginning because there was no need to be looking for late vocations, but yet he did see that there would, I think almost prophetically, that there would be a need in the future. So he started that.
For someone who's listening to this show who's not familiar with seminaries, what does the word late vocation really mean? Does it mean men of 80?
Well, now it usually does, but in the older days, it would be anybody who was not someone who had gone through, for instance, high school, Catholic high school, and gone into college in pre-theology. So someone in the 30s, someone who was in their 30s in the 1950s would be considered a late vocation. But now it's an entirely different thing because we have many, many men who are seriously delayed vocations, sometimes 50, 60, even into their 70s. So that's what the late vocation means. It's not the average age of that time, which would have been teenagers and 20s.
Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about this community that began the college, that is the Missionaries of the Holy Apostles.
Yes, the Missionaries of the Holy Apostles was founded by Father Menard, and it was an order of priests, and he wanted, this was in Canada, and he brought some of them to Cromwell and started the seminary on the grounds that it is still on, which was
that's by the way, Cromwell, Connecticut.
Yes, Cromwell, Connecticut. And it was a private sanatorium that he bought called Cromwell Hall. And that had been serving people who had emotional disturbances. So he brought the MSAs, the order of priests there, and they started the seminary with him. Then in 1984, the structure changed so that we had a board of directors, including the 3 Connecticut bishops, and other clergy, as well as laymen and women.
Now, about how many priests do you think have come out of this college and seminary?
Well, I didn't count. We have an appendix that I worked on that lists the graduates, and until probably the late 1980s, most of those graduates were people men who wanted to be priests. There were some lay people and some sisters and brothers, but predominantly they were men who wanted to be priests. I know in the time that I've worked there, 21 years, I've been involved in the academic formation of over 200 priests, and there are many more that came long before I was there. So I would say literally hundreds. Probably close to, 700-800, a lot.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So tell us more about the atmosphere of the seminary. What you loved about it. What did you love about it?
Well, there's a very simple lifestyle, which is very radically different from what it is that we normally live in the materialistic country we live in. So I was attracted to the life of prayer, the sacraments. The chapel at that time was not the new chapel, which I can talk about a little later. It was a very small building, but yet everybody was happy. At one point, the seminary was so poor that we used to have a sign out front that would say, we need potatoes or we need tomatoes, whatever, and people would drop these things off. So a simple lifestyle, very simple, and not exactly a life of poverty, but certainly not a life of materialism, and really a dedication to study, to sacraments, to being in the chapel. So that was what attracted me, because it was so different from what I had been familiar with as a regular secular person in the United States, and I had gone to University of Massachusetts for my degrees, and of course that is a very different lifestyle.
Now, the teaching at the Holy Apostles College and Seminary, and also their online teaching, which we have a whole online segment of Holy Apostles College and Seminary. It's always with the teaching of the church, right? It doesn't
absolutely.
have dissent.
Yes,
could you talk a little bit about that problem?
Mm-hmm. Well, what we have is our teaching is what we call magisterial, in that we follow the magisterium of the Catholic Church, or what it is that the Church authentically teaches. And so that basically means that we go back in time, we look at Scripture, we look at the apostles, we look at patristics, all the way through, and we're very Thomistically based. We spend a lot of time on the work of St. Thomas Aquinas, and also the more recent encyclicals and documents that come out of Rome. So we are teaching the authentic teaching of the Catholic Church. on any number of issues, whether you're looking at dogma or whether you're looking at moral, for instance, with Catholic social teaching or with theology of the body, a couple of the courses I teach, and that we all take the mandatum, which means that we have to uphold what the Church teaches.
Well, that was especially significant for me coming to Holy Apostles because I'm a philosophy teacher and I teach ethics a great deal. And not every Catholic school, unfortunately, is teaching with the Church. And so you have people in, as you say, both dogmatics. The dogmatics, for example, you have people who just come to think of the Eucharist, the body and blood of Christ, as just being a symbolic thing, and that all religions are equal. Yes. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Catholic or something else, as long as you're following the light that you see and all that kind of thing. And so that can be very demoralizing to students.
Yeah, so certainly recent surveys have shown that the overwhelming majority of Catholics, even practicing Catholics, don't believe in the real presence, probably do not believe in the virgin birth. And many of them wonder when Jesus discovered he was God, which he knew from the instant of his conception. And on the moral side, of course, the life issues especially, where abortion and birth control are seen as perfectly fine. People divorce and remarry at about the same rate as seculars or non-Catholics. So part of the beauty of Holy Apostles is that if people are really looking for the truth, they're not going to be misled here. They're going to get exactly what the Church teaches.
My experience, because I taught seminarians in several different institutions, is that if you don't believe strongly in that it's really the body and blood of Christ, then people don't want to become a priest, because there are all these sacrifices connected with the priesthood. So if you're not thinking that becoming a priest means that you can do this incredible supernatural act of consecrating the bread and the wine and the whole real presence of Christ, why be a priest?
Right, exactly.
So I thought our students were just wonderful. Now, when you look at the book, you'll see all these radiant faces of seminarians. It's just wonderful to see. You must have enjoyed finding those, didn't you?
Oh, yes. And that student body has changed and grown, and still you get that same radiant look. So, for instance, now with the online program, we have people all over the world study with us, the English-speaking world primarily. For instance, we have priests, seminarians, sisters, and some lay people who study online with us from the African countries of Eritrea and from Tanzania. And we have a large population of Vietnamese, some Chinese, Colombians, and Lebanese studying on campus. So one day, years ago, I was teaching Vatican II in St. Barnabas up on the second floor, and I looked around the table. I had 18 students, and I was teaching them Vatican Council II, and I just looked at them and I said, how many people were born in this country? And out of the 18 people in that class, 13 were born somewhere else. Venezuela, India, Vietnam, a couple of from different countries in Africa, Nigeria, and I think Ghana. And that so impressed me, because when I first came, we primarily had older vocation, delayed vocation Americans that were all very happy. And now we have people from all over the world, and they're all very happy. It's the same thing. So in a way, we're not only global now, we really are a little picture of the universal church.
Yes, I used to say I grew up in the era when the United Nations was first formed. And that whole idea, and then we were kind of disappointed that the United Nations, it did many good things, but it didn't do what we thought it would. Exactly. But when I came into the church, I'm also a convert, when I came into the church, I said, oh, this is the true United Nations, all these nationalities, you know.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So it's a very, very rich, wonderful environment in terms of intercultural Catholicism.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. It is.
For sure. Now, I want to ask you, I can see how everybody, any person who graduated from Holy Apostles, either from the college as a lay person or as sisters in the college and seminary or in the MA program, that anyone who was connected with Holy Apostles would want to have a copy of this book, which, by the way, is being published by En route Books and Media, which is the publisher that runs this radio show, WCAT Radio. So it's being published by En route Books and Media, and you can just Google the title, The Story of Holy Apostles College and Seminary, and you'll find out how to order it. But why would someone order it who is listening to this program and here's our enthusiasm? Why would someone read it who hadn't been to Holy Apostles?
Well, I think that people certainly are interested in a Catholic seminary where the truth is really taught and where it's been taught for so long and grown and developed, especially anyone who's interested in evangelization, and trying to turn the culture around to see that there is this little jewel in Cromwell, Connecticut, where we're doing that, one person at a time, and I think that would be a big draw.
Could you tell us a little bit about the Pastoral Studies program in the MA, online MA?
Sure. Well, we offer MA online in theology, in philosophy, and in pastoral studies, and we do it in a wide variety of areas of concentration. So there's, I think, 5 in philosophy, 7 in pastoral studies, and 8 in theology. So what we basically do is we have online, and people can take these, the theology MA they can take on campus. But what we basically do is we have, that would be 12 courses. They have to take 12 courses in their area of choice, and included in that, they would have to take a comprehensive exam, or they could take 10 courses in their area of concentration and then write a thesis. So it's a long process. It's arduous. They all start with basic courses. For instance, in pastoral studies, they start by studying practical theology and eventually go on to such things as care of people in the hospital, some kind of sociological studies. And it's Gregory Popcak, Dr. Gregory Popcak, who is the he has a radio show that's quite famous. He is the chairperson of that concentration. So
now, some people, I find what people don't realize, I'm always meeting people out in the world in parishes who do parish ministry who said, oh, I wish I could, get a degree, get an MA, or sometimes even a BA. And they don't, but I'm so busy, and they don't realize that you can just take one course a semester, and eventually you'll have your MA, see? And because it's online, you can do that study any time of the day, during lunch hour or after you put the kids to bed, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So we have wonderful, wonderful students in these programs who make enormous sacrifices. Like I was amazed to see in the African country of Eritrea, I was teaching some of them. They were mostly pastors trying to get theology degrees, but they already were ordained priests. And they couldn't go during the day at all. They would go at 1 o'clock in the morning. They would go to the diocese office and sit in front of a computer and do these classes.
Part of the beauty of the online program, which I'm partial to, part of the beauty of that is that people study with all different kinds of people. So you have priests, seminarians, sometimes, not often, but you have seminarians. You can have religious, cloistered nuns, for instance, who cannot leave the convent, but they can study with all these other people. Lay people, whether they are fresh converts or whether they are people who are RCIA directors, it's like all kinds of different people all working together with the same love of Christ, the same love of the church. And they are learning slowly. You know, it takes time. If you have to take 12 courses and you're taking one a semester, obviously that's going to take you quite a while. But you can still go through the whole process. The other thing is that I've seen, and I myself have made friends with some of the students that I've taught, because you have them in multiple classes, and there's actually, students who will be in the same class 2 or 3 times and form friendships. So it's really a very friendly, supportive environment in which to learn theology, philosophy, or pastoral studies.
Mm-hmm. Now, tell us a little bit about the leaders. After Father Manav, tell us a little bit about some of the rectors of the seminary.
Well, we've had 7 rectors, and the first 2 were long before my time, long before I was Catholic, Father Charland and Father Desbian. So I've known, or at least met, the succeeding 5. So, for instance, I have met Father Meitzelfeld, who has now passed, and he was the 3rd rector. He had a great love of classical music, and he made sure that the students were exposed to it. He wanted them to have some sophistication in the better things of life. And he said, I have a quotation from him, that music enriches the spiritual life and deepens the life of prayer. So frequently he would have little concerts, or they would listen to music that was classical. So that was really his focus, his personal focus. Father Leo Ovian, I met briefly. He was the 4th rector. I met him when he was awarded an honorary doctorate at Holy Apostles a few years ago. He guided the seminary for several years. And then we had Father Lesko. Father Lesko was the rector when I was a student at Holy Apostles, and he was a very fine man. I met him a few times and talked to him a few times, and I found him to be quite an elevated thinker. But the last two rectors that we've had, Father Lawler and Father Mosey, I know very well. So Father Lawler, I was one of his students, and I took contemporary moral theology with him, and I think that he was one of the finest professors I ever had. He had a deep love for God, and he really exhibited that in the classroom. He was very concerned about bioethical issues, which, of course, when he was teaching were nowhere near as serious as they are now. But he was a fine person, and he actually was rector at 2 different times. Father Mosey is currently the rector. He has been the rector since I actually converted. He was one of my first teachers. He taught Vatican Council II to me, which is one of the courses I now teach. And he was my mentor during my student years, and he's a very caring man that guides students. To this day, he guides students to make sure that if they want to go on to another school, that they get there. He leads them and, make sure that they're learning the right things and taking the right classes. Very hands-on. So those are the 7 rectors, 5 of whom, as I say, I have at least met, and the last 2, I was very well acquainted with. And I can say, with all honesty, that every one of those men, whether they're now not a rector or Father Mosey, who still is, they worked very, very hard to make sure that regardless of what the person's state in life was, whether they're a seminarian or a priest or a lay person, that they got as much out of every class and as much out of every program as they could. They really worked hard to make sure people learned what they needed to learn.
Absolutely. When I was teaching there, I was very impressed with the whole seminary and with the rector, Father Mosey, who's the only one I knew personally. By the way, I edited a book called Last Call, 12 Men Who Dared Answer, about late vocations, and you can look that up. Just look at, my name is Ronda Chervin, Chervin, but if you just look up Last Call, 12 Men Who Dared Answer, you can find this a very, very helpful book in seeing if maybe you yourself who are listening might have a late vocation and want to apply, look into Holy Apostles. Would you tell us just a few words at the end, Dr. Toolin, about books, other books that you've written?
Well, I've written 2 other books that I'm currently seeking publishers for. The first one is my memoir, my memoir, which is called a survival memoir. It's a memoir of forgiveness because in 1949 my mother tried to chemically abort me. And she stopped because when she started to bleed, she was afraid that she would die. So my life was spared because she was afraid of dying. She told me that when I was 11, and it wasn't until I converted to Catholicism when I was 38 years old that I learned the true value of forgiveness, and that if I was ever to recuperate from, really from what had happened to me, or the knowledge of what had happened to me, that the only way that I could do that was through forgiveness. And I only learned that through the Catholic Church. And I praise God for that every day. The second book is also a memoir, and that deals with some of the life issues that I have encountered in my Catholic life. My first husband died of cancer, and how he was treated when he had cancer 10 years before my second husband had heart disease is astounding, because he had every care he needed. They tried to prolong his life as much as they could, as comfortably as they could in a secular hospital. And when my second husband developed heart condition, there was a lot of talk about physician-assisted suicide. I live in Vermont part of the year. So there was talk about physician-assisted suicide and, what is your quality of life. So in 10 to 12 years, the whole atmosphere around the medical profession, I found, had changed. So I talk about that. I talk about my children, although I do not use their names. And I talk a little bit about my mother and father, although not the same material as I covered in the first memoir. I would also like to attest, because I read Dr. Chervin's book on the call, and I know the men that she interviewed and talked to, and I have to say she did an excellent job. It's very accurate and excellent read.
Yes, well, one of the reasons I'm mentioning this is because the faculty is made up of very, very interesting people, some of whom were late vocations themselves.
Yes.
And it's a fascinating faculty. And if you get the book, The Story of Holy Apostles College and Seminary, you'll be able to make the acquaintance of some of these faculty members, and you can look into books that they've written and things like that. So we're now at the end, almost at the end of our program. Would you like to make some final comments, Dr. Toolin?
Well, what I'd like to say is that I think that Holy Apostles is a real jewel. I encountered it in 1988 when it was very different than it is now, and it changed my life. I mean, certainly my life had been changed by converting to Catholicism, but it enabled me to live Catholicism a particular way. It helped me in that way. And I have seen so many people come through, lay people as well as seminarians, brothers and sisters, and it is a life-altering encounter there. As Father Mosey likes to say, that you have to, if you live a life that is simple, a life of prayer, a life of charity, where you're focusing on the right things, that it is a life-altering event. And as our now deceased Monsignor Liptak used to say, every time you encounter Jesus, every time you receive the sacraments in the chapel, every time it is an encounter with the Lord Jesus. And I found that to be very true at that seminary. So I hope you'll all at least consider someday visiting us, buying the book and reading about it if that's what you would like, but also to consider a visit to the place or even to enroll as an online student. I can guarantee you it is not something you would regret.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, again, the book is called The Story of Holy Apostles College and Seminary, and please look for it. And God bless you all. Thank you very much, Dr. Toolin, and your co-author for all the work you put into this marvelous book.
Thank you.
And for Dr. Sebastian Mahfood, the director of En Route Books and Media, the publisher of the book. Amen.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.